Welcome to the 12th Cast podcast dedicated to the 13th gate. The 13th gate being all those things that we're reaching for to create during these times, all the things that we haven't been able to draw out to bring a synthesis and to bring perhaps greater unity to our connections so that we can all move forward in the right direction and honoring everybody and honoring the needs of where humanity is at. So today I have a guest. This is a platform that I created that allows for people to come on anonymously, but we're not going to be doing that today. So perhaps, Ryan, you would like to introduce yourself and maybe share, I guess a little bit about what you do, and we can take the conversation from there.
Sure. My name is Ryan Young, and I teach at John Abbott College in the Media Arts Department. I'm a city councillor here in St. Anne de Bellevue, where I grew up, and I was first elected in 2009, and I was just recently re-elected again for a fourth time. And I've always been involved in political stuff. So I've run for the Green Party before. I've run for the NDP or the New Democratic Party. And I've always been an environmentalist, so I've been very involved in environmental issues and environmental causes. And I'm also a very spiritual person, and someone who I like to think, is a great student of history, whether it be local history or world history. And I tend to have viewpoints which, clash with the mainstream monolithic point of view about what constitutes reality, what the true history of Earth is. And so I would say my perspective is a little bit different from the mainstream, even though in many ways, I am part of the mainstream.
Very interesting. There's some things that I didn't know about that I just discovered now. So there's a lot of things we can dive into. I'm curious to know what your experience has been during these times, being someone who has a different perspective on things. And I guess a lot of what we've been going through since 2020 has been bringing to the surface all of the differences that we have in our perspectives and, how we've been running society and basically how we're doing things and where we're going. So how was that experience for you in terms of has it brought more conversation to the forefront? Has it opened up avenues to discuss these different viewpoints with people that previously wouldn't have maybe, been interested or open to various different perspectives?
I don't know. I think that, in general, at least in my circle of friends, and even in some ways my family, I've always had kind of, a lot of alternative viewpoints about a lot of different things. So that didn't really change during the pandemic. I have to say for myself, I was kind of caught a little bit off guard by the pandemic when it was first starting, and I fell for the media's fear mongering. Even though while it was happening, I was kind of like, oh, I'm being manipulated here, So I was sort of aware of that, but at the same time, I did some ridiculous things like, clean my groceries when I brought them home, or leave them on the back porch for a while after I brought them home. All these things which I think are completely ridiculous now. And I've always known that fear is, the only thing to fear is fear itself. And whenever you're in fear, you lose your power. You're not grounded. You're not rational. And I am a bit of a worrier in my life. Like I'm a little bit of a helicopter parent with my kids, and I'm not a totally calm, relaxed person. So I can see how I was manipulated there. But over time, I processed that fear, and I said to myself, I'm not going to live in fear during this pandemic, whatever the case is. And anytime I go into that place, I'm going to work to get out of it as quickly as possible so that I can remain rational and, more, I don't know if the word powerful is right or not, but more together as a person.
More centered. Yeah, I think it really showed us like our the weaknesses that we have in our own, like with our own fragility, on survival, on life and death, and our greatest fears. And I think they were all exposed to us during those times. And looking back, like I did some pretty funny things as well. And of course, we know about, everybody worried about they're running out of toilet paper and and so on and so forth. So yeah, it really just showed us our humanity and our humanness, and that those lower aspects of self that need security, need to feel secure in order to thrive. And so that was really taken away, and we were left exposed. All of our greatest fears just exposed. But I think it was an event that also gave us the healing, because after seeing everything exposed, we really were, I feel I was able to clearly identify, like, okay, this is what I need to work on, these points right here. So the media obviously didn't help with any of that, and we're still dealing with the the ongoing circus, which is the media.
The mainstream media,
Yeah, the mainstream media. And it's hard to sort through, right? It's an ecology. It's like the information ecology has just expanded over the last few decades, and we have access to so much information. And it's very apparent if someone's just looking at mainstream news versus dabbling and doing their own research, or have been for years. That also I found really came to the surface, the differences between what information people were looking at. Because we like to think we're an intelligent species, but really we're often just repeating what we've read or what we've heard. It's very difficult to actually sit there and to think about things. We just don't, we usually don't take the time to sit there and to question what it is that we're observing. It just sort of flows directly into the subconscious mind, and then we regurgitate it and piece together all these little parts that we've collected. So do you have any thoughts on that? But what was your experience with that in terms of the information that you were sourcing from, and how that was impacting you, and maybe some of the things you've noticed in other people?
Well, I mean, in terms of the mainstream media being kind of a source of propaganda in general, I am a teacher in the media arts department. I teach courses about the mainstream media. And for years, I've been talking about how, what the media reports on has more to do with what the corporate interests are of the company that runs that media outfit, than it has to do with the truth. And that, even going back to the 1930s with Hitler or Mussolini, they all said that, basically even the first uses of cinema and the first uses of radio, that these were the greatest weapons for any country to use to mobilize their population in a particular direction. So if you wanted to convince everybody that they had to go and fight, a neighboring country, well, you had to drum up support, sometimes by fabricating stories in order to shock people, appall people. And, there's all these classic cases that later turned out to be untrue. For example, just before the first Gulf War with Iraq, there was this report that there were Iraqi soldiers in Kuwait going into hospitals and taking babies, premature babies out of incubators and throwing them on the floor or something like that. And this turned out to be a fabrication, untrue. So, I'm just if you're just a student of history and you look at how governments manipulate their populations for various purposes, usually for military purposes, but all kinds of purposes, then you know that the population is always vulnerable to being lied to and to having a lot of propaganda sent in their direction for a particular aim. And so, I think a lot of what is happening today during this pandemic, the truth will come out later. And it's hard to sort through everything and know what was propaganda and what wasn't. But I think it's pretty obvious that when you look at sometimes what one country says versus another country, they're not saying the same thing. Sometimes they're saying things that are completely mutually exclusive, yet they both claim to be getting their information from science or from their public health authorities. So for me, the truth always outlives a lie, and we'll know the truth after this in a couple of years or maybe sooner.
Yeah, it's always in retrospect that we have greater clarity. And that's the difficulty is, we're living in the now, and we're having to source from history as well, like, going back and looking at patterns that have repeated and getting that information, like some of the information that you just brought forth can be really helpful in orienting ourselves in the right direction and being able to look at the information clearly, and because everything is so sensationalized, so it's easy to just hop on that bandwagon and feel affected by the fear mongering of whatever's being pumped out.
Yeah, I'll say also, I think of two people when they talk about media. There was Paul Watson, who was the founder of Sea Shepherd, which is an environmental group, a little bit like Greenpeace, that uses direct action. He's sort of famous for ramming whaling ships on the high seas and that kind of thing. So he always said that, if you want to get your message out, there was a recipe that you had to use with the media. And he was using this recipe to try and get his environmental stories out. And he also drew some of these theories from Marshall McLuhan and his analysis of how media operates. But one of his key things that Paul Watson said, he always said, your senses can be massaged and can be manipulated. And he said that he personally generally took it as a rule that don't believe what you read, don't even believe what you hear, and don't even believe what you see without personal inquiry. So I've always thought, well, even if I see a video of what something is supposed to be, which is usually kind of like the most obvious way to verify something, then I'm still not going to necessarily believe it until, or I'm gonna try and look for other countries' viewpoints about that particular thing. Here in North America, we always vilify Russia, and the attitude is kind of Russia. Everything that Russia says is wrong, and everything they believe is incorrect, and there can't be anything of value coming out of the mouths of the Russian government. Well, I'm sorry, that's just a complete rejection of another nation state's perspective. Russia has a different perspective on the war in Syria than the US, and it's because there's these different interests. So I never will accept, for example, when Obama was sitting there in one of the government, could have been the White House, I guess, and they were watching the takedown of Osama bin Laden. And it was like, they're watching this like on a television, like it's like a late night television show or a primetime television show. And I thought, this is probably staged. And it is true that even today with computer graphics, it would be so easy for any government to hire any creative, computer graphics company and create something in a video that would look like reality, and it would be completely computer generated. That's where we are. It's Hollywood demonstrates that with the movies that we see. So I base everything on, if I read about something in the newspaper about something going on in a different country or even a different province, I always want to speak to somebody from that country or that province to have independent verification. Is that true? Is that really what you sense on the ground where you're living? And so I think we're living in challenging times in terms of believing anything the media says. The main thing that I use the media for is local news. And the more local, the better. So I used to read a lot of the local newspapers in my community. There's fewer and fewer now. And I would kind of more enjoy that news than I would any international news. And I think when I read the Montreal Gazette, I'm mainly looking for information about things happening in the city or people or whatever the case is. But even there, I'm not sure that what I'm reading is accurate.
Yeah, you're bringing up some very good points. I know that those videos that you're talking about are called deep fakes. And the deep fakes now, you can go onto YouTube and check it out. I mean, it's just incredible what they can do, switching faces. They can even take, a sample of the person's voice and then reanimate it, saying other things.
Yeah.
So we're now in the age of illusion. Like, we don't know what we're seeing, whether it's real or not. And that is a very real thing that we're all dealing with. So this kind of bridges us into like a deeper place, when we do come to that awareness and we're not taking things at face value, and we're really, like you said, returning to that connection with people, connecting with people on the ground. I think there's a theme that's that's been coming back up over and over again over the last 2 years for myself and many people that I know, which is like reconnection with the community, because we sort of disconnected so much with all of the information that we have access to that we are now connecting on a global scale. We're able to wake up in the morning and look at what's happening everywhere in the world, where we didn't have access to that not that long ago. So I found myself sort of really being concerned with so many things that I could not affect change, that I couldn't really do anything about. And then that brought me back to the place of, think globally, act locally, and returning back to my community, and then returning back to what is really true, which is our connection with each other, how we're treating each other, what we're doing on a day-to-day level, our connections with family and friends. So perhaps all of this is bringing us back to a more holistic place and a more even spiritually connected place with ourselves. So maybe, I don't know, what are your thoughts on that in terms of like living in this age of illusion and then, it's sort of bringing us back to questioning what is real, and then again, bringing us into that deeper space of like, our spirituality. Where has that brought you? over the last 2 years, or over, since you've since you've encountered the illusion out there?
Well, I think the best route is always your local community and connecting with the local nature around you, and growing your own food, and communing with nature. To me, that's kind of the source of everything. That's going to promote your health the most. And connecting with other people, and there was a point in the first part of the pandemic where we were very disconnected from each other. We weren't talking to each other. And I always found that as soon as things started to open up again and you were talking to your neighbors again, well, you hear stories, and some of these stories don't compute with the monolithic narrative there is out there about the pandemic. So there's that. But and I won't say anything more about that. But for me, it's very unhealthy, no matter what the threat is, for the government to tell people that they cannot meet with each other. Obviously, the government, at least the Quebec government, has been recognizing the importance of socialization in terms of education. And so even when cases were high, they were making sure that schools stayed open, and they were more committed to that than, for example, the neighboring province of Ontario. But by the same, with the same logic, I think, to tell people, for example, this Christmas, that they could not gather with anyone is completely nonsensical. It does not promote the health of people, and I can't see it even being a major source of transmission. I think after this is all over, many public health officials and scientists will laugh at some of these restrictions. And I always, since the beginning, have looked at the country of Sweden as being a more rational approach to the situation. I don't think the way they handled it is perfect in Sweden, but they have never tried to say that you could not meet with people. They never, even when they had the strongest restrictions in Sweden, and I think they were forcing some bars and restaurants to close early or to stop serving alcohol after a certain hour, they were never involving themselves in the private residential lives of people. They might suggest, hey, it's a good idea not to gather in very big numbers, but they would never pass a law where a police officer could give you a fine for speaking to a friend inside your house, or speaking to your grandmother inside your house, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Humans need contact with each other to be healthy. It is not, that is what we do to prisoners to punish them, is we put them into solitary confinement, even though they're in a horrible prison setting, and they may not even like their fellow prisoners. Nobody wants to go into solitary confinement. And during the whole pandemic, I've had a family around me, right? I have 2 kids and a wife. But think of all the people that were alone. And there are many people on the fringes of society that lead already very lonely lives. And many of them are just barely kind of hanging on from a complete mental health meltdown. And so I think the data is already out there, how bad it has been for mental health for the population. Yeah. And the government's insensitivity to that, and complete willingness to ignore that, has really shocked me. And again, I look at the country of Sweden as being the most rational model there is out there. And they are a Western country. They are so-called, their public health people are governed by scientific data. Whenever they were asked, oh, why are you doing this? Or why are you not doing this? They always backed it up with scientific data. So, obviously the countries that chose to be more restrictive were cherry picking what data, or they weren't even bothering to explain the scientific rationale why they were doing certain things.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean that I think we've all spent a lot of time looking at that, and what I find very, I guess it's just mind blowing, right? So the fact that it's so unbelievable that this all took place always brings me to start looking for answers in other places that we haven't been looking in. And one of the places that I started to observe and focus on was the technological revolution, which they term the fourth industrial revolution. And on the Canadian government website, you can find a document called Biodigital Policy Horizons for Biodigital Convergence. And I know that, China has already implemented a lot of technology. A lot of their industry is being automated and has been automated. And I know that this has been, in a sense, a threat, because every country is having to keep up with any other country that's moving forward with such great power, because there's a lot of power in technology, not only power of surveillance, but just with the automation and it completely transforming the economy and the way that production is done. And that trickling down to the management of society and of, the people in that society. So there are some cities in China that already there's just cameras everywhere, and you can literally walk out your door just with your phone on you through the voice recognition, ask for an Uber, get in the Uber, face recognition. It's, it already has your information so that it could, through the transaction, just take the money from your account. And everything is just, it's like, it was described to me that the next generation would be born into a world where the technology was so incorporated into the environment that they would not even be aware that it's there. Sort of like our generation being born with electricity. It's part of life. And that was a huge difference from no electricity, the 2 generations prior, running on candlelight. So I started looking into that avenue, and I know that there was a big pressure for other countries to implement this technology. And I'm wondering, how much of a connection was there during that time, or how much, not necessarily, which came first, the chicken or the egg, but what sort of technology was implemented, was being, or the during the pandemic, how much of that time was, the situation and the circumstance was being taken advantage of to advance all of the implementation of technology in our country. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but that's sort of where my thoughts led me, because I couldn't really understand the restrictions to the point that they were, and having to stay home, being locked up. It just, it didn't make there was no reason to it. And I felt like it was just, it had to do with something else. Like so that's one of the places that I went. I don't know if you've gone to that place, or if there are other places that you went to sort of draw some answers from that might not be in the mainstream narrative. If you have any thoughts, maybe you can share.
I've always been very distrustful of technology in general. And again, studying world history, so many technologies are developed for military purposes. Even if they had a public inventor invent them, most likely they were already a classified military technology. Because rarely is there ever one person that kind of develops a technology, uniquely on their own. Usually there's always a few people working on that same, technological issue, and they're all kind of competing for whoever's going to get it out first. And most of our communication technologies were all classified military technologies before. The internet, being a classic example. At first it was called the ARPANET, and it was part of the US, it was a US military project. So I have a kind of perspective on that in general. So many technologies were first invented as military technologies, and my perspective on that about humans in general is that, and my sort of analysis of at least Western society, although probably this is not exclusive to Western society, but is that we're a very violent species. Western society is very male dominated, has been for many years. It's starting to come out of that, but for the longest time it was extremely patriarchal, right? Women didn't even have the right to vote. They were not full participants in the society. And so much of what was created was, I'm going to kill you before you kill me. Or in order to make sure that you don't kill me, I'm going to find out some way to kill you or maim you so you won't kill me or maim me. So many of these technologies do not come from a good place, so the karma of these technologies are fully there. They're fully tied up with violence and control. So it's a little bit hard, I remember Marshall McLuhan once said, the medium is the message. So regardless of what content is in the medium of a particular media, and sometimes he used the analogy of a gun for this. He said, what's the message of a gun? It doesn't matter, what, the gun always has bullets in it, and the bullets are always meant to do damage or to kill or whatever, right? And you can use a gun for good purposes, I guess, if you have to feed yourself and you need to kill an animal to eat because it's the only option or whatever. Well, then I think, of course, a gun makes sense. But so the medium, like your phone or the internet, it has a karmic thing associated with it, and unless technologies are developed coming from a place of love and compassion and wanting to help each other, I think we're going to have this issue with these technologies. And I do believe that phones are highly addictive. I'm pretty addicted to mine. I only started to have a smartphone in 2015, and it was pretty fast how addicted I got to it. And some of the apps are very addictive. I still mindlessly scroll through a lot of stuff, and I feel that is the worst thing for me to do in terms of my health and my mental outlook. And so I think the best thing for people is to hardly use these devices at all, spend as much time without them around, never have them on or near you while you're sleeping, keep them away from children. My kids, I can't stop it. I haven't been able to stop it, but I try to limit their screen time as much as possible. But if I did have, if I could have my wish, I would not have my kids exposed to phones or tablets or the internet until they were 18 years old. My understanding is that it's going to negatively affect any of these kids' mental developments. And I see it myself. I see it in my children. So I'm against an AI world. I'm against an artificial intelligence world or a transhuman world where we're part machine, or but the fact of the matter is that if we know that a lot of technologies that now we take for granted were classified military technologies first, then what do they have now that has not been released yet, right? And
Mhm.
my belief, and it's, you hear various people who were, whistleblowers who said, oh, they're developing this technology or they have that technology. And, they do have extremely powerful technologies that they don't tell the public about. And the public is incredibly trusting of the government. And, the way that they have characterized conspiracy theories, the way that the media discredits anything by calling it a conspiracy theory. But, conspiracies are constantly happening. Your coworkers could be conspiring against you so that you don't get a position, right? We all live with that kind of thing going on in our lives all the time. It's human nature. Humans conspire. It's one of the things they do really well and that they do all the time. And when you call somebody a conspiracy theorist, all you're saying is that they have a theory about some humans conspiring. Well, it's happening all the time, right? So it's a value judgment. You're basically judging the particular content of their conspiracy theory. But in the end, everything that, has kind of come out in history over time was always at first a conspiracy theory before it was a truth about conspiracies. And governments, especially from a military perspective, they are always conspiring. And it's their modus operandi. That's what they do with their, even their allied countries. They obviously do it a lot with their enemy countries, but they're always conspiring even with their ally countries. And they're always trying to extend their power, extend their influence. And, China is a great example of a country doing that right now. And the US has been doing it for forever. Russia does it. Canada does it. We're part of the Five Eyes, right? Which is an intelligence sharing network, which includes Australia, the UK, New Zealand, Canada, and the US. We're all complicit in that, but the regular human population would like to pretend that everything is just always being done for our best interests. And I just think they just ignore an aspect about humans. We are dangerous. And until we realize how dangerous we are and how much we need to evolve, we're not ready for powerful technologies. We demonstrated over and over again, we weren't ready for nuclear weapons, right? So we're not ready for any other powerful technology because we don't know how to use them responsibly. And we show that with the destruction of the environment. We don't even know how to live on this planet in a sustainable way without threatening the carrying capacity of the planet to allow us to survive. We really are screwed up. And I think it's very clear,
Well, it's interesting because some of the people that there has been a movement. There's always been movements popping up for peace and unity, and then you have the pushback of that's the false light, it's the cold light, because people aren't looking at realistically what is within our human nature and our capacity for evil. So I can see both sides because I believe we do have both sides, within us. Everybody has the capacity to commit horrific atrocities and also the capacity to reach for a greater understanding and a greater synthesis. But then when you take that and you scale it out, we're dealing with game theory, right? And a lot of war strategy comes into play because one country doesn't know what the other country is doing. And, if they decide not to go ahead and, continue advancing with their weaponry, then, and the other country does, then, that asymmetrical power will eventually come and devour us. So this has constantly been at play. And this is what has been holding, all of the chains of wars together, among other things. But it's like you said, it's within our human nature. So addressing that, I think, is our biggest challenge, because, if we are a country that works to heal, that works to come into unity and work together as people within our community, then we'll definitely be stronger, united under one country. And then hopefully, countries can then do that together.
For sure.
Mhm.
I've always felt the best approach is to decentralize everything. And, in that way, I'm kind of a libertarian anarchist. That's always been kind of my political, place on the spectrum. That whenever you have any large institution that has too much power, they can't be trusted. And so the more that you decentralize things and diversify things, like in nature, right? Nature diversity is the model. Then the less easy it's going to be for some, big power to manipulate everything, because it's going to be too complicated. But I think some of what we're seeing on the world stage today is because there is a lack of decentralization. And I have kind of a love-hate relationship with Canada. I study Canadian history, but I've discovered a lot of horrible things that our country did, especially to Indigenous people. And I think our country, any country that is not basically based on a group of people that have nationhood because they have their unique language and they have their distinct culture, I think they're entitled to be called a nation. But Canada is a bunch of Europeans that came over here, killed a lot of the original people that were here, and then tried to take it over really for the benefit of Europe, right? Take it over for the benefit of Western society in general. The US is the same story. But I still think there is hope, and that we could do good things with the country that we know as Canada. But we've got a lot of evolving and changing to do before I would ever trust our central government, because too often they've shown that they can't be trusted.
Yeah, it's interesting with some, once you get very, very intellectual about this stuff, right? And coming from just a purely logical place, this is how war has always persisted. And every civilization has always conquered another to gain its power. And this pattern has repeated itself as far back as we know. So this is the reality of it. And it's a hard pill to swallow, to know that, we're alive, because our ancestors and their ancestors and their ancestors at one point were all conquering another nation in order to survive, like it's us or it's you. So it kind of, it's difficult to accept that, and to know that, survival is always going to depend on, I don't believe in, the fittest survive. I think that there's way more complexity that we're now tapping into, but in a very basic sense, yeah, the strongest ones with the biggest weapons will always outdo the others. And a lot of
I think it depends. I think it depends, though. I mean, it all depends on the cultural orientations of the culture. It's that story of conquering neighboring nations mainly comes from Europe and Asia. That didn't really happen in native North America. They always had small wars with each other. So neighboring tribes would war with each other, but the casualties were always small. They rarely ever, wiped out another group. It's again, it's the patriarchal nature of Western society, and I think it's how injured that whole culture was by the church, by, for example, persecuting witches, trying to round up all of these wise women and kill them all. That never happened in native North America. So Western society is a really particular form of human that, to me, is deeply problematic. And some would say that, the reason why Europeans had to have contact with native North America was to learn from the indigenous people of North America how to be better humans. And, there are prophecies you hear sometimes, or stories of how horrible it was for indigenous North America to be colonized by Europeans, but that maybe over time the Europeans would learn from their mistakes, would be exposed to the different cultures of indigenous North America. And you do see that a little bit, right? Because the US Constitution, which is considered to be one of the first forms of democracy, that was influenced by the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. They borrowed things from the Great Law of Peace of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and they were transformed by their contact with indigenous people. And many Mohawks here in Ganawage, who were part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, that's part of their history. They're proud to say that they affected U.S. politics and culture and the founding of the country. So, but so often, the old European tendencies catch up with these countries, Canada and the U.S. And of course, Canada never did become independent. It stayed part of the British Empire, and so became more influenced by the British Empire through that, but nevertheless was also influenced by their big neighbor, the US. So that's what I would say about that myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for bringing that forth. I believe that there's something, if I go back far enough, like we can go all the way back to, Egypt, like ancient Egypt, during some, like with Sumeria, and we look at the evolution over like a longer period of time. You have peaceful nations, and then you have nations that are more oriented towards conquering, right? And gaining greater territory. And then this often brings me into, well, what are the, what constitutes those people, and what allows them to be of that mindset, to either be, more driven to co-create and to share knowledge and wisdom versus those that seem to be more predisposed to war, right? And now we're getting into, it goes into a lot of deeper things in terms of consciousness and what's involved in that. And so maybe, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to reach for before we close this off, that might go into a place that's unfamiliar to many people, but that sort of dabbles in consciousness, that dabbles in history, and or for just the human race, and maybe extending outwards. I'm looking to grab towards something that would just bring our listeners some information that they might not have heard of before.
Sure. I mean, just to sum things up, for me, I am an optimist, and I do think humanity is going to evolve to a better place. And I think that there are a lot of forces which influence humanity. And, I think the earth itself is a being, I think the earth has consciousness. I think everything in nature has consciousness, the trees, the plants, they're all sentient beings, the animals, the insects, and they have a stake in everything as well. and they influence us in ways perhaps we're not even aware of. And then there are other possible, influences from even outer space. I always find it funny, I saw a journalist once say that, today he was taking he was attacking astrology and saying, today, your day will not be influenced by the stars and the planets. And I thought, well, that's a ridiculous statement. We all live on a planet. So yes, we're influenced by a planet. Life is made possible on Earth because of the star that our planet rotates around or orbits around, the sun. So your day is basically made possible by a star. And because of the nature of stars that are created in the universe, and the moon, which is a big, not even that big celestial body that is orbiting the Earth, governs women's menstrual cycles, governs the tides in the oceans, and so many other things. And you're trying to tell me that Jupiter, this massive celestial body that is in our solar system, is not going to also affect my day? That's preposterous. Of course it's going to be affecting my day, and maybe, yes, affecting my emotions, and maybe, yes, affecting my character because of where it was when I was born. So I believe that, there are cycles on the Earth that are natural, and there are cycles in the galaxy that are natural. There are cycles in our solar system. There are cycles in the universe, and they will influence humans to change in all kinds of ways. And for me, I think the nature of the universe is good and is meant to bring us more and more in touch with love and compassion and self-realization. And so, I
think you're onto something. And I think part of our reason for being in conflict with each other, and, whether that's on an intimate level or on a global scale, has to do with a lack of self-awareness and a lack of, so it's the self-love, but the self-love comes with the self-awareness and knowing ourselves, right? Because when we know ourselves, we're never truly brought to a place where we can get totally sideswiped by something, which is often what causes the cognitive dissonance and which causes us to act out and act in fear. And so learning about ourselves does tie into the planets, because, the microcosm and the macrocosm is a real thing, as within, as without. So perhaps we can get into another conversation, a deeper conversation, another time on a later podcast about some of the more spiritual aspects. But I'm very grateful to have had you on and to have, just been able to share with you on this level and share with our listeners. So I'd like to thank you very much, Ryan.
Well, thank you. It was an enjoyable conversation.
And are there any, you had mentioned that you have a podcast. Would you like to share the name or any other information for links that you have?
Sure. I do an environmental radio show called Equilibrium on CKUT 90.3 FM, and it's on the World Wide Web at ckut.ca. But then there's also an affiliated podcast called the Equilibrium Radio Podcast, which is available on Spotify, or you can find it online by going to equilibrium.podbean.com. Great.
Thank you so much. I'm wishing you a beautiful day.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to run off to see those truckers.
Enjoy.
Okay, take care.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.